Good evening and welcome to the Franchise Tag podcast with me, your host, Freddie Hall. Welcome back, Johnny. No James this evening, which is a shame, but it's okay. That's more than fine. Both of us here have watched all the NFL over the weekend, and we have plenty to talk about on this week's episode of The Good, The Bad, and not the ugly, and not the great, but the future. We'll be looking into the future. We've brought the crystal ball with us tonight to see what could be happening in the future for the NFL, but more on that later. A bit of quick fire news just to begin the program as usual. It seemed there's a bit of disgruntlement within the New York Giants organization this weekend. Rumors are flying around that some of the players were very unhappy with the dismissal of Daniel Jones. He is now reached the waivers though, and apparently there are teams interested. So it may be a very short amount of time before we see Daniel Jones play or be on an NFL franchise in the near future. It also is looking like their quarterback Tommy DeVito may not be 100% to play this weekend's Cummings matchup. So maybe they'll turn to Drew Lock. We shall wait and see for that. It was brother v brother last night. First time in 11 years, I do believe. Jim and John Harbaugh came up against each other with the LA Chargers and the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens and John Harbaugh beating Jim 30-23. And what a game it was. It was a game last night for me and Adam. And we never say this very often, but you should definitely stay up for, which neither of us did. So we didn't exactly heed our own advice, but I'm sure you did. And then Gardner Minshew, unfortunately, quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders, not the LA Raiders, Las Vegas Raiders, may be looking to miss the rest of the season with a broken collarbone. So the Raiders are hoping they're going to be starting with Aiden O'Connell. However, he has been on IR since week 7 after breaking his thumb. So Desmond Ridder does wait in the wings. However, they do feel that O'Connell should be ready for this weekend. We will begin with the good tonight. And we are looking at a team that, they're in your division, Johnny, the Miami Dolphins. They have gone from really not looking like much of a team this year with Tua's injury and a lot of people calling for Tua's retirement and a lot of onus on that, of which we talked about frequently on the podcast, now looking like a playoff contender. After a 3-game losing streak, they've bounced back to a 3-game winning streak, beating the Patriots over the weekend, 34-15. They are looking at a team that has got a bit more direction now. And do you think that this is a team that could now be sort of one eye looking towards the playoffs?
Yeah, I think that the Dolphins have been in really scintillating form. I mean, since Tua's return from his latest concussion. I mean, taking that with a pinch of salt. Obviously, they've just the Patriots, who they really dismantled. Wins against the Raiders, Rams. And so forth. Not as the point I'm trying to make is they haven't played another contending team at the moment, and I think the game on Thanksgiving this week against the Packers will be a real test of where they are. But from what I can see, this is a really, really good football team, and I think you could make the argument that Tua is playing the best football of his career at the moment. He looks like, he looks very comfortable. Obviously, if the Dolphins had sorted out their backup quarterback position, they wouldn't be, I don't think, in this position where they could potentially miss the playoffs. Their poor start has led to them being, restricted as a result. And, he's proven that he's not a system quarterback. He's very much the system in Miami. And, he still, I saw something just before coming on about to his averages, and, he's throwing just for an average of 5 yards a pass against the Patriots, which doesn't sound a lot. And obviously that's onus on, the help that he has around him. But he's not made a mistake since coming back. He's thrown for 11 touchdowns, 1 interception, has a passer rating close to 120 in the game since his return. So this is someone who's playing, at a very, very high level. And, I think that the feel good factor is definitely back in Miami. It's going to be tough for them to make the playoffs. I think they need to probably win out, given their start to the season where they lost their first, I think, 5 or 6 games. So they've got a running, I think, with, obviously the Packers, the Bills, the 49ers, who are obviously struggling themselves, but are very much a team that can show up. So I think they need to still do something extraordinary to make the playoffs. But yeah, this is what we want to see from Tua. I think on both sides of the ball, the Dolphins are a good team, and obviously much better when he's fit and playing.
Yeah, I mean, when he was away, they were 5 and 6 out of the AFC East, and when he was away, they went 1 and 3. Since being back, they're now 3 and 2. I mean, they didn't produce more than 15 points in the games that he wasn't in, and since then they haven't dipped under 20 points. So, and also they didn't throw for over 200 yards when Tua was away, and they've done it every game since he's been back, apart from the Rams game, admittedly. So, I mean, we're not making this a completely Tua thing, but when they all happened with the whole concussion thing, the calls for time, I don't think anyone really doubted that Tua can play or that Tua suited this team, because I've always thought McDaniels has always been very invested in Tua, more than everybody else. And I've always thought, every time there's been a draft cycle and there's people have gone, oh, well, maybe Miami will look at a quarterback because, Tua isn't all that. There's the concussion stuff. Like, I've always gone, no, that they won't. You can tell that this team is really invested in him. And I don't think anyone sort of doubted that he's a good player. My issue is maybe that certain players maybe didn't step up whilst he was away and put the team on their shoulders. So do you think it's like not just his playing style, but also his leadership within the locker room, and also that there is a bit of I suppose you've got to find your groove, haven't you? And when there's a dip in that, how do you get that back? It's very easy to keep winning when you're winning, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think that, like I said, that they have rolled with Skylar Thompson and Huntley, who came in for a couple of games, I think this year. They've rolled with, I would say, below average backup quarterbacks, and that I think that's something that will ultimately cost them, because they knew about Tua's. Obviously they gave him the extension this offseason because they trust him. They know he's a leader, and they feel he is their right person for the future. But the injury history is something that has been talked about for a long, long time, and I just don't think they've built their quarterback room, well enough to give them a chance if that sort of thing, obviously, which did happen, to going down and get injured. So I certainly think that's something that the Dolphins will look back on. They lost, games against teams like the Titans, who, close games, but I feel with Tua in there, or a quarterback, who gives them a chance, that it could be very much in the conversation in the AFC. And I think like I said, I think it's a big ask for them to make the playoffs. Obviously, the Broncos are a team who are sneaking up the leaderboards, and the AFC is very competitive in its nature. So wildcard spots are very hard to come by. But it's been a very eventful year for the Dolphins, and we've sort of gone on a roller coaster of writing them off, bringing them back in. But I think this has proved this season that the last 3 games, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because I still think they're not in that conversation of being, a genuine Super Bowl contender when everything is clicking. But Tua has proven that he is deserving of this contract extension. And yeah, I just think it's the Dolphins are a team that unfortunately need absolutely everything to click. And I feel that is, they're building towards something at the moment. The defense, I think players like Chop Robinson, who they drafted this season, looks a really, really good stud player.
The defense at the minute, I mean, they're in passing yards, they're 6th. In rushing yards, they are 9th. Like they've sneakily got a pretty decent defense, actually.
Absolutely, yeah. But players like Robinson and Calais Campbell, he's been such a great surprise. How huge of a part he is.
At 55 years old.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, they've done such a good job at, like you say, stopping the pass and stopping the run, despite, concerns, I think, at the start of the year. And, they yeah, I just think the start of the season, unfortunately, is proven too much for them. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'd always talk, I think, about the Dolphins being there or thereabouts, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. The offense is now obviously back to what it was. I think, great to see Waddle, and obviously Jonnu Smith has been a great addition. They've obviously got Tyreek, and the plethora of running backs who can all run sub 4.4s in the 100-yard dash. So they've got the talent there. They're just a team that needs everything clicking in the season, and it just hasn't happened, unfortunately. But huge admirer. Obviously, they're a divisional rival, but Tua's always been someone that I think I know he has the talent. It's just been, I think, a bit of a difficult journey for him, and I hope he stays fully fit and continues to prosper and get better as a quarterback in this league.
Yeah, I think when you look at their schedule now, I mean, like I said, they're at the Packers, they host the Jets, at the Texans, host the 49ers, and at the Browns, at the Jets. I mean, to be frank, I can see them only losing to the Packers, to be honest, with how it's going. I mean, I don't think it's unacceptable. I know records sort of go out the window with division matchups, so I'm not going to plant the flag in, but it's 2 wins against Jets. Like I honestly, that I know you're a Jets fan, and I think that could be one apiece. He could be swept. I don't think you sweep them, unfortunately. I think the Packers, you will either get rolled or you roll them. It feels like they are with Jordan Love. It's a bit of a gunslinger mentality. The Texans at the minute can't seem to find themselves. Don't really know what's going on with them. They're a little bit all here, there, and everywhere. And the 49ers is a team that doesn't really know where they're at either as well. They're seeming to not be having a great year this year. And then they've got the Browns. I know the Browns won last week, but Browns aren't a great team at the minute. I mean, the only thing is, and I do believe in this sort of thing, how cold is it going to be in Green Bay? How cold is it going to be in Cleveland? How cold is it going to be in New York? I do believe that. I know it gets cold in Florida, but it's not.
That is exactly my worry. We know how, poor is probably the wrong word, but how they seem unable to adjust to the cold weather in previous games against, whether it's the Chiefs in the playoffs or going to Buffalo. And looking at that list, they've probably got 3 coldish games if going to Lambeau, going to Cleveland, and even MetLife. I'd say on their final game, if that is
January, it might be colder in New York than it might be in Cleveland in a week.
Exactly.
In a week's late time, aren't it?
Exactly. So it's going to be difficult for them, but I can see them having a positive record for the rest of the season. And it's difficult to say whether that's would you count this as a failure for the Dolphins this season if they just about missed the playoffs at say 8 and 9, where they only lose 2 more games for the rest of the year. I don't know. I think the start of the season obviously crippled them, but
I think if they hadn't had the injuries that they have, because it's not just Tua, they've had some injuries elsewhere as well. Waddle's been out for a fair chunk, and I think it's a negative season if they don't get in the playoffs, and it's a bum season for them because every year they're about there. And all right, okay, it would be positive, I suppose, if they just miss out with the problems they had in season. But I still think, this team still has a bracket. It has an expectation of itself to get to the playoffs. I think people forget that Miami gets talked about for some off seasons as maybe perhaps topping the division. At certain times, some people don't always believe in the Bills as much and feel like their window is closing. The Jets has been an odd one for everyone. The Patriots now have a new quarterback in town, so it's tough. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. Yes, it's a positive season if they finish with a winning record because of the problems they've had in season, but no, it isn't in the grand scheme of it, because this team, in their mind, must feel like they're ready to go and compete now and try and get to the Super Bowl. Let's draw our attention to the bad for this evening, and that is going to be about Kliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders. And here's someone that we've praised incredibly heavily on a lot of this podcast. But is his past now starting to haunt him? Things have sort of unearthed, they've had a bright start at him as the OC, Johnny. He's gone. They were now 7-5 though, and they lost to the Cowboys over the weekend, 34-26, which is now 3 straight losses, which is a season first for them this year. They've not done that at all this season. And when you go into week 12, this just finished week 12 of this season, people are sort of looking a little bit to the past of Kliff Kingsbury and how he did with the Cardinals, and also at his time with an offensive analyst at USC. And also as well, the teams are sort of maybe figuring out the Commanders a little bit here. I mean, it's quite an embarrassing loss for them against the Cowboys, who people are regarding as complete trash at the minute. What's your view so far on this?
It's an interesting one. I mean, going into the game, there was reports that Jerry Jones was planning, to plant potential seeds to go and get Kliff Kingsbury for the 2025 season. Obviously they haven't gained much momentum following that loss, but maybe those sort of things got into his head. I mean, before the game, I was expecting this to be a conversation about how many points the Commanders beat the Cowboys. So I think the way their offense stunk for the best part of 3 quarters, obviously only really turning up in that absolutely crazy final quarter in Washington. But I think we've got a little bit of a reality check because I think at the start of the season, if you were to tell a Commanders fan that they would be 7-5 with a decent chance of making the playoffs, I think 99% of those fans would have bitten your hand off for that. So in that sort of hindsight perspective, I think the Commanders have definitely made progress with Kliff Kingsbury as their offensive coordinator. It's just obviously the recent struggles, particularly after seeing Jaden Daniels ball out so well to start the season. I think it's a combination of a lot of things, and I think the ultimate one is we probably overhyped the Commanders as a whole, not just this offense. I think we saw on Sunday, their defensive mishaps. This still isn't the unit that we thought it was potentially becoming. This is coming up. A season prior, they were the worst defense in the NFL. So there have been improvements, but not at a substantial rate. And I think that'll take time. They've got the personnel and the coaching to do that. Same with special teams. Obviously, cost them with the kicker Seibert, who unfortunately has been so reliable for them this year. So taking that game, I think was definitely a combination of everything about the Commanders not necessarily being as good as we thought, not necessarily being a genuine playoff threat. But I think if they lose a couple more games over the next few weeks, then genuine question marks will start to emerge. I think they have their bye week next week. They've got the Titans this week, and the Titans, I think are proving that they have one of the best defenses. I think in the NFL, to be honest, and they're obviously just being held back by lackluster play on offense. So I think this is a really good test for the Commanders this week. Let's see if they can overcome it. But I think we're still being a little bit too early. I mean, it's a huge coincidence, obviously, with Kliff Kingsbury being so well in the first half of the year. We obviously saw what he did at the Cardinals a couple of years ago, and then dropping off in the second.
I've actually got the big breakdown there. So let's stick on sort of Kliff, because there is a theme here. That when you look back, so week 9 is where we've sort of started to go wrong a little bit with the Commanders. So I went and had a look at it since 2019 when he started at the Cardinals, and I did the breakdown of their record at the end of the year, their record at week 9, and then their record after week 9. So 2019 they went 5-10-1. At week 9 they were 3-5-1. They went the rest of the season 2-5. So okay, fine margins, but it was a worse record. 2020 they went 8-8 for the season. They were 5-3 at week 9. They then went 3-5 for the rest of the season. A flip in score lines there. 2021, that fantastic season they had, where went on that unbeaten run. They were 11-6 to finish the season. They went 8-1. They then went 3-5 to finish the season. 2022, where they were terrible, and I believe Murray's big injury. 4-13, they went 3-6, and then they went 1-7. Again, I'm not saying 3-6 was a great start, but 1-7 is a terrible ending. He was then the offensive analyst at USC from 2023 in 2023. I'm not saying he had the biggest influence on there, but he may have done. I don't overly know. We're in the college game how much he did, but it was only obviously a 13-game season. So let's say week 6 rather than week 9. They went 6-0, and then post this they went 2-5. Is there maybe a bit of a thing with Kingsbury, his struggle for adjustment, and that maybe a bit of stubbornness towards his style of game plan, and that teams will start to figure you out, and also as well maybe his failure to adjust of when injuries do inevitably happen as well, and sort of shifting around and playing around with the pieces you've got. I mean, we sort of have a bit. We do have proof in the pudding there, but it's clearly on the second half of the season he does seem to struggle.
I think one of Kliff Kingsbury's, what has been highlighted purely from this season is, he gets his players playing, so fired up and with tempo and staying on the field. And injuries, and I think just a lack of talent, not just on this Commanders team, but I think even if we look back to that Cardinals team of yesteryear, these aren't teams that we expect to be competing for Super Bowls, and the fast start, I think, mentality that Kingsbury wants from his players. The Commanders to start the year, I think in the first 7 games were averaging well over 350 yards on offense, and that's really tailed off, and that's obviously a huge concern. And obviously some onus has to go on the coach and the obviously the coordinator here for not getting enough from his players. But I just think that the Commanders don't have that caliber of offensive players at the moment. They've got Terry McLaurin and Brian Robinson, who obviously went down against the Commanders. You can potentially still keep Austin Eckler in there, but outside of that, you've got unreliable patch casters. You've got players who are probably playing a little bit past their sell-by date. You traded away Dotson, who he fell off a cliff, by the way. Where's he gone? But and obviously Curtis Samuel. So that unit is changed a lot. And obviously bringing in a new quarterback, and there's a lot of change with a new personnel. I just think it will take time for this team to gel. I'm massively up on Jaden. You can probably tell, so I'm probably being a little bit defensive, but he obviously started so well to start the year and has tailed off a little bit. And I think that's that is slightly natural. I think they need their bye week to come to them to get a bit of a rest and a sort of take the pressure off a little bit, because the angles have changed. Jaden Daniels was thrown into being the next superstar in the NFL after a few really good weeks, and maybe it's pressure that's catching up to them. That's certainly a huge thing. Kliff Kingsbury, that's you've said that evidently has that has caught up with him in the past, but I do think it's probably more the talent issue than looking into
his coach.
What's the word of it? The coaches and any sort of theories or conspiracy theories about Kliff Kingsbury being absolutely terrible in the second half of the season.
Conspiracy theories, wow. That's shut down the section.
What was I trying to think of there? I was trying to think of I can't remember, but I was basically just saying I think we probably just need to lay off him a little bit, but obviously the next couple of games, I think the Titans game, obviously the bye. Will it be a failure if the Commanders fail to make the playoffs? I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure.
It's the same Dolphins argument.
Exactly.
I think.
Same with the Dolphins. I think you would probably consider it a failure. Some people were putting the team into potential NFC champion, potential Super Bowl contender. they're not there yet, I'm afraid. And I think that's, not just on offense. I mean, that's across the whole team. So I think it'll take a couple of years. But yeah, I think the good factor, it's gonna stay around in Washington, I think, for a while. So yeah, no worries long term. They should be able to bounce back, I think.
We now look into the future, and as some of you may know who get notifications from these sort of things, but the Pro Bowl voting is now opened. However, we dedicate an episode to that, so maybe that's going to be coming up very soon, but we're not going to be doing that today. Instead, we're going to put our eye towards the head coaches and potentially who could win the head coach of the year. A winner of it last year was Kevin Stefanski. He won it. The Cleveland Browns went 11-6. Obviously, they were without Deshaun Watson for a lot of their season, like they are going to be this season. But it was the reemerge of Joe Flacco and pushing towards the playoffs, didn't they? And at this point, it'd be good to look at some of the coaches that are maybe on that short list now. And because I find actually that Coach of the Year, Johnny, is very different to all the rest of the players, in the fact of it's not just given to the guy that wins the most games. It's about adversity as well, and also maybe expectation before the season started. It's also about what they had to work with and things like that. So, immediately when I look at the list of teams that have got very good records, my eyes immediately go to Dan Campbell being 10-1, and it's like, well, but we knew the Lions were going to be good, and it's the same with Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs. They're what, 9-1, 10-1 as well. Sorry, both of them coaches have expectations that the team was going to be very good. You sort of need to look in that bracket below. So, what sort of coaches do you think at the minute are ones that could definitely be in for a scratch here?
Yeah, I just to point on your Dan Campbell sort of suggestion. I think I agree with you. Unfortunately, I mean, I'd love to see Campbell win Coach of the Year. I think what he has done, to install that sort of mentality and atmosphere in Detroit is, absolutely hugely commendable, and he should be awarded for that. That's obviously been something that he's worked on for the last few years. But I'm going to talk about a few new coaches, I think, who have come in and definitely made a difference. I think Sean Payton's one of them. He's obviously in his second year in Denver, but the way that Bo Nix is playing, we talked about him last week being the potential offensive rookie of the year. I was a bit low on him, said he needed to do something special. And I think he's done that something special in the game against the Raiders. He was, even better than what he was against the Falcons. And I think largely, that's down to the confidence that Sean Payton has put in him. This unit, the adversity, I think, in Denver, in the off season and last season, it's a very what's the word, like volatile environment. It felt like, and Sean Payton's put together a really, really good football team, and people seem to love him. He's obviously a huge football mind, and I think he's done a great job with Denver, who are one of the surprise packages of the season. So I definitely think he's in contention, and I think Jim Harbaugh as well. Obviously, the Chargers did lose yesterday, which would have potentially dampened his status. But this Chargers team, they on paper, you would think have probably got worse, in terms of the personnel before the start of the year. They lost Keenan Allen, a bunch of the players, they've not got that wide receiver or running back threat. They've hired players that, bit part players, but no real superstars on this team. And he's been able to put together a really good team. Justin Herbert's back to playing at his best. The defense is playing lights out. And again, he's just a guy who interacts with the media, with the fans so well, and just a real feel-good factor is back for the Chargers. So he's someone who came in with a lot of expectation. A lot of teams were after him, and he came to LA and has really, really changed the mood, and I think the expectations potentially for the Chargers with a team which is on paper, you wouldn't think are Super Bowl contenders, but they're there or thereabouts. So obviously people like Mike Tomlin, I think, has got a great shout. Who else?
My issue with Mike Tomlin is that the Steelers are still playing the offense has got better, and yes, you could point to, was going to start with Wilson. Wilson's injury started with Fields, then moved on to Wilson. Has had a really good record this season, but the defense is still playing what we expected it to play. Like the team is still playing the way we expected it, and they're achieving good results. But like, I don't overly think they've not. Again, it's sort of, this award is a little bit about overstretching your mark in a way. You know what I mean? And that's why I agree with you being with like Jim Harbaugh. It's like, yeah, we know Jim Harbaugh's a good coach, but he hasn't been in the NFL for 11 years. He's coming into his team, a team that, again, depleted of talent on the offensive side of it, had a good draft, have got a really, really high-end defense now going, even though they had high-end defensive players' names on pieces of paper for a lot of coaches. He's getting them to a high level. And then who was the other person who said Sean Payton? Yes, with Bo Nix, and and how dismal their year was last year, even though they did have a winning just under a winning record. They went 8-9, but he's given Bo Nix a capability. But then, how much is it him or Bo Nix? I don't know. I think he gets the scratch there. Yeah, I just thought I'd chime in because of the Steelers. I mean, my two that I think are like. One of them is because I think he was absolutely phenomenal when he was in London. That's Kevin O'Connell for the Minnesota Vikings. Like they're 9-2. Like that's adversity. Like I thought their off season wasn't great either. Like I didn't like that they lost Daniil Hunter and players like that, and they brought in Jonathan Gridiron, and I was a bit like, that's a bit of like it's not the same as Daniil Hunter. I think he's a good player, but I didn't think they had a great off season. They draft JJ McCarthy, and you sort of like, we don't really know what's going to happen with McCarthy. They lose him. They have Sam Darnold, who, let's remember, in the offseason and going into week one, no one thought Sam Darnold was going to be like he is now. He's totally revitalized his career. Everyone was like, well, this is like, I think most Vikings fans were a little bit out on the fact that he'd have a good season. Justin Jefferson's had a couple of niggles through the season. There's that problem, and they're 9-2, and they're looking like they're going to go and win the division. And then actually, I'm going to stick in division because this is a coach who's not won it, and I think definitely should win it at some point. And that's Matt LaFleur with the Packers. They're 8-3.
He's never won it. Wow.
Say again.
He's never won it.
I don't think he's ever won it. I don't think that is. I've literally just tried searching for it though, and I may have to get a list of previous Coach of the Year awards just to double check that fact, because I could be wrong. But when you look at him, like he's been without Jordan Love for what? He was at Jordan Love 3 games, something like that. He had Malik Willis, who everyone was like, this guy's trash at Tennessee. And so 2018, he's been the head coach. No, he's never won it. No, he's never won it. Last 4 winners, and Stefanski, Dable, Vrabel, Stefanski, John Harbaugh, Matt Nagy, McVay, Jason Garrett. That's up to 2016. So he hasn't been in the head coach position that long. So I think they've got a really good defense. They've not. I always go on about how I love their offensive unit, but let's face it, they aren't stars. That none of their like 10 wide receivers they have. None of them are the headline guy, but they have got just great depth in there with Reed and Wicks and then also with like Josh Jacobs as well, who's been really great at running back, and Love can sometimes also be a little bit gunslinger as well. And yet, to be 8-3 to then go pressing onto the playoffs, like I think that's really impressive. And the fact is, I'm not saying because he's never won it, he therefore should win it. I'm just saying that it's surprised me that he hasn't won it.
But I think your point about these coaches having to deal with adversity, if you look back at the coaches that have won it over the last few years, Kim Stefanski, obviously you've talked about Brian Dable, who didn't have the greatest of quarterbacks or offensive units, and was able to put together a playoff run. Mike Vrabel again. These are coaches who haven't been, like we've sort of said, up there being really big winning teams or Super Bowl contenders. So I think those points about O'Connell, LaFleur particularly, I think are great shouts. I
will sorry to interrupt you. I will have to admit, the only person who hasn't got 10 plus wins and has won it is Daboll in 22. Pretty much everyone since. I mean, the only time last time that happened was 1990. So So everyone has sort of 10 plus wins, which when we've just talked about the teams we're talking about, I can see 10 plus wins on all them teams.
But
they've still had to overcome adversity to be there.
They have had to, had to go through something. Not saying that they're bad football teams, but not necessarily being in the Dan Campbell Detroit Lions winning, what are they, 10-1, Andy Reid, etc. So I really like the Fleur and O'Connell shouts. I mean, I've gone for, I think we've talked about it a little bit more. We're all about, head coaches that are leaders first, and coach specialists second. And I think people like Campbell, Sean Payton, obviously huge football coach, but these are hard-earned men who are leaders and have completely transformed atmospheres within franchises. And I think everyone that we've mentioned, I think, deserves to be in that sort of conversation. Has Mike Tomlin never won Coach of the Year as well? Just from looking at that,
Ooh.
I don't know. Obviously, we don't.
I'll take a look at that, because that's interesting.
So he is currently the favourite alongside Dan Campbell. Which
no, he has never won it.
Is interesting.
Which is a bit nuts considering how long he's been in the league and how long he's been on the Steelers. Like, that is actually quite wild when I come to think of it. Like the last Steelers, we won it in Bill Cowher won it in 1992.
Okay.
Like that is pretty nuts considering how long he has been in the NFL. But then when you look at the history of it, actually, there was a year where there's weird years when you actually look back at it. It was the year where it went Bruce Arians, Ron Rivera, Bruce Arians, Ron Rivera. Like that's 4 years of titles where it just bounced between them guys, which is good fun. I mean, so Tomlin's the favourite. Who's your one at this point in the season?
I think Sean Payton. I think there's now a transition from from Jaden Daniels to Bo Nix, and I think we're starting to sort of say the same thing about Sean Payton being a real catalyst as well for change. So whether he can, whether Payton's name can stay on the Knicks bandwagon, I think they probably need to get a couple more wins in the next few weeks. But he's someone that there's been clear change. And another name that saying Jonathan Gannon. I mean, he at the Cardinals,
I suppose
is massively transformed. Not a massive name. I think there'll be quite a lot of people listening saying, "Oh, who's Jonathan Gannon?" We don't really know much about him. But the Cardinals have been very much a team that have gone against expectations. There are a lot of coaches who have a good shot, but I like Payton. For me, he's been someone who has really helped to change the fortunes of a franchise. I would love Dan Campbell to win it though, because he's everything that I'd want in a head coach. But as you say, it's probably the people around him who've probably made the big difference in terms of on the field stuff. So
I think if you ask him, he'd rather win a Super Bowl than the head coach of
the
year. Let's finalize this episode up with our hot seat cold thrown, as we usually do. Hot seat this week, I'm going to let you start to begin with, Johnny. Who have you got on this week's hot seat? This is a section we do every week. Usually James does a little bit of judging to what he thinks is better, but without him here, we'll just compete against each other, I suppose. Who have you got?
It's Antonio Pierce of the Las Vegas Raiders. It must be so tough being a Raiders fan right now. Obviously, Pierce coming in after a cameo head coach interim role last season. The Raiders have been so poor this year. They've just had Minshew ruled out for the rest of the year. O'Connell's not back, so it's Desmond Ridder against the Chiefs. This feels like it's going to be Groundhog Day again for the Raiders. Another head coach on the hot seat. What's Tom Brady and Davis going to do at the top? I think there's major changes needed, and unfortunately, I think Pierce has lost the dressing room. He could be on his way out of Las Vegas very, very soon, I think.
I am also sticking with a head coach. Because if anyone's first time listening to this, we don't just go for head coaches on the hot seat. We go for pretty much anyone. Everyone is in the firing line for a hot seat take. But I'm going to go D'Amico Ryans, man. Like 2-3 in the last 5 games. Also the Jets, the Lions, and the Titans. Lose the Titans 32-27. This team was meant to be this like boom team this year, and it's just not really working. And I think they're sort of hiding under the shroud of injury a little bit. And, we were out Nico Collins, we were out Stephon Diggs. Well, Tank Dell's done nothing this year, and Tank Dell was a huge factor for you this year. You've got a running back that is leaps and bounds better this year in Joe Mixon. You've got some really young, I think their defense is still good, but I just, they don't seem to be developing CJ Stroud. I just think it's not looking great for D'Amico at the minute. They're not a top defense, they're a decent defense, and their offense is looking really hit and miss at the minute, and it's just not.
They've taken a back step, haven't they?
Say again.
They've taken a step back, haven't they?
A huge step back. I think they're probably the most disappointing team of the season, and that sounds really big. I probably would have to look at the teams of this before I plant my flag on that, but they are for me because I was so big on CJ Stroud and what he can do. So we'll see how they go. But D'Amico needs to figure it out for the Houston Texans. On the cold throne for me tonight, I usually am quite niche with these picks, but this time I'm just not going to stay. I'm not going to go niche this time. Jordan Addison, wide receiver, the Minnesota Vikings, 162 yards and a touchdown in their 30-27 win via the Bears. He's having a bit of an uptick of targets in the last 2-3 weeks, and he's doing well with it. Like he's obviously going to be in Justin Jefferson's shadow a lot of the time. Jefferson was a non-factor in this Bears game, and he really came out and shone. If anything, I could have maybe done this joint with him and TJ Hockenson, because Hockenson has also had his injury problems this year, and he really came out in this game as well. I've always really liked Jordan Addison. I think he's a really good player. I think it takes a lot to be sort of second string to the best wide receiver in the NFL, and he plays it really, really well. And he's worked really well in this Vikings team, who I think are just a joy to watch this season. So he is upon the icy throne. Who is on yours this week, Johnny?
Mine's a bit rogue. I didn't think
one of us needed to go rogue this week. One of us needed.
It was like a huge superstar from this week. Obviously, you've mentioned Jordan Addison, but I'm going for a player and a team who actually lost this week. I'm saying that Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers, they're not a good football team, but I think they will be very soon. And they really, really took the Kansas City Chiefs close on Sunday. The most sacks that Patrick Mahomes has put up, and Young was fantastic against the blitz. If they can, keep playing at this level and this unit and have the confidence, obviously, a win would have done so much to their confidence. But I really do think that they're starting to turn a corner. And I think, if we look at the numbers, I think, Young is actually playing like a really good quarterback at the moment. And he's finally starting to show the flashes of his playmaking ability that we saw so many times during college. So, that's more like a future call throne. But well done to the Panthers for not being terrible and actually doing quite well against the Chiefs.
I like it. I really like it. I think that's really good. Yeah, I think Young's starting to show a little bit of something now. It's not as dismal as it was. He's sort of been humbled by his benching and his bounce back even better. Johnny, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Thank you, everybody for watching or listening on YouTube or any other podcast platform. Thank you for following us on social media and keep sharing our content out there in the world. We've got the college show and also our betting show coming in the rest of the week with Andrew, Adam and Alex, which will be a lot of fun. We'll be back next week with you. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you all again very soon.